At first glance, German soldiers were told exactly who their enemy was. Nazi propaganda painted British troops as weak, outdated, and overly dependent on their empire. Yet the reality on the battlefield quickly challenged that image. During the early campaigns of World War II, especially in France and Belgium, many German infantrymen encountered British soldiers face-to-face for the first time. What they saw surprised them. British units often held their positions longer than expected, retreating not in panic, but in organized formations. German war diaries from 1940 repeatedly mention the calm behavior of British troops under fire, something many German soldiers did not anticipate. One German officer later wrote that British soldiers seemed less emotional, but highly disciplined, noting how they followed orders even in hopeless situations. At Dunkirk, while German propaganda described the British withdrawal as cowardly, frontline soldiers saw something different. They watched an enemy execute one of the largest evacuations in military history with remarkable coordination, under constant air attack. Quietly, respect began to replace mockery. This respect became even more visible when British soldiers were taken prisoner. Numerous German POW camp records describe British captives as polite, orderly, and surprisingly resilient. Guards noted that British officers continued to enforce discipline among their men, even in captivity. Football matches were organized. Jokes were exchanged. In some camps, German guards admitted that British prisoners were easier to manage than their own troops. In North Africa, the perception grew stronger. German soldiers under Rommel spoke of the British as serious opponents, not reckless fighters, but professional ones who valued strategy over bravado. There was no hatred, only rivalry. By the middle of the war, many German soldiers had come to an unexpected conclusion. The British were not just enemies. Before World War II turned Europe into a battlefield, Britain occupied a very different place in the German imagination. For many Germans, especially officers, academics, and middle-class citizens, Britain was not viewed as a natural enemy, but as a powerful rival worthy of admiration. German newspapers of the 1920s and early 1930s often described Britain as the world's leading naval power and the guardian of a global empire built on discipline, tradition, and organization. British military culture, in particular, commanded a quiet respect. German officers studied British campaigns from the Boer War and World War I in military academies. The British Army was seen as conservative, professional, and deeply rooted in tradition rather than ideology. Its emphasis on officer responsibility, regimental identity, and battlefield discipline resonated strongly with the Prussian military mindset. The British Empire itself was frequently admired in Germany. Many Germans viewed it as proof that patience, diplomacy, and naval dominance could sustain global power without constant revolutions or internal chaos. German travel writers and diplomats in the 1930s noted how British soldiers abroad often acted as administrators as much as fighters, maintaining order rather than seeking destruction. Before Nazi propaganda hardened public opinion, German society did not see Britain as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a competitor that had succeeded where Germany had failed after World War I. Even Adolf Hitler, in his early speeches, expressed hope that Germany and Britain could coexist, respecting each other's spheres of influence. Only later, when war became inevitable, did this image change. The respectful rival was transformed into a caricature. Yet beneath the propaganda, memories of Britain's professionalism and military tradition remained, quietly shaping how many German soldiers would later judge their British opponents on the battlefield. When German forces crossed into Belgium and France in May 1940, many soldiers expected a quick and disorganized resistance. British troops, they were told, were slow, outdated, and unprepared for modern warfare. The first encounters, however, told a very different story. German infantry units advancing near the River Dill and later toward Arras reported meeting British soldiers who fought with methodical precision. British machine gun teams held defensive lines longer than expected, withdrawing only after orders were given. One German soldier noted in his diary that the British did not panic, even when flanked, instead retreating in small, well-coordinated groups. What struck German troops most was British discipline. Prisoners taken during these early clashes were often calm, well-organized, and respectful. Even after defeat, British non-commissioned officers continued to maintain order among their men, something that impressed many German guards. A Wehrmacht officer later wrote that British soldiers accepted setbacks without complaint, treating the battlefield as a professional duty rather than an emotional struggle. At Arras, where British tanks briefly halted the German advance, confusion spread among German ranks. The sudden appearance of heavily armored British Matilda tanks shocked German units and forced them into defensive positions. For many German soldiers, this moment shattered the illusion of British weakness. The enemy was not chaotic. It was disciplined, trained, and capable of decisive action. By the end of the French campaign, German frontline troops had formed a clear first impression. British soldiers were not reckless fighters nor ideological zealots. They were professionals, calm under pressure, loyal to command, and committed to order even in retreat. These early encounters planted the seeds of a respect that propaganda could not fully erase. In late May 1940, German forces reached the Channel coast, trapping hundreds of thousands of British and Allied soldiers near the port of Dunkirk. To the German high command, victory seemed inevitable. Propaganda quickly labeled the British retreat as a collapse, a shameful flight from the battlefield. But for many officers and frontline soldiers, what they witnessed did not feel like defeat at all. From the dunes overlooking the beaches, German troops watched endless lines of British soldiers moving with unexpected order. There was no mass panic. Units marched toward the shore in formation, waiting patiently under air attack. A German artillery officer later wrote that the British withdrew with discipline, not fear, noting how officers maintained control even as bombs fell around them. Some German soldiers mocked the scene at first, calling it a running army. Yet as days passed, disbelief replaced laughter. Despite constant bombardment, the evacuation continued. Small civilian boats appeared, rescuing men under fire. German officers recorded frustration in their reports, not at British weakness, but at British efficiency. Privately, many Wehrmacht officers acknowledged the truth. This was not a rout. It was a calculated strategic withdrawal. By saving the core of its army, Britain preserved its ability to continue the war. One German commander admitted that had the evacuation failed, the war in the West might have ended in 1940. Among the ranks, opinions shifted. What propaganda described as cowardice, soldiers on the ground recognized as survival through discipline and planning. Dunkirk became a lesson. An enemy could lose ground yet win time. For many Germans who witnessed it, the evacuation was not an escape. It was a warning that Britain was far from defeated. In the chaos of battle, fear often reveals itself in sudden movements and desperate decisions. Yet again and again, German soldiers noted something unusual about British troops: their calm. This quality stood out not in moments of victory, but under pressure, when defeat seemed unavoidable. German frontline diaries from France in 1940 describe British soldiers continuing to brew tea, adjust equipment, and wait for orders while artillery fire thundered nearby. One infantryman wrote that the British moved slowly, almost stubbornly, refusing to rush even when shells landed close. To many Germans, this behavior felt unnatural in combat, but also deeply professional. This calmness extended to firefights. German after-action reports mention British machine gun crews maintaining steady fire until ammunition ran out, then withdrawing without shouting or confusion. A German non-commissioned officer recalled capturing a British position where the defenders had stacked their rifles neatly before surrendering, an act that left a lasting impression. In captivity, the same behavior continued. Guards wrote of British prisoners who lined up silently, followed camp routines without protest, and kept morale through dry humor rather than defiance. One German officer noted that British soldiers accepted danger as part of duty, showing neither panic nor hatred toward their captors. To German soldiers raised on discipline and obedience, this composure was impossible to ignore. It suggested an army trained not by ideology, but by habit and tradition. In the middle of war's violence, British calm became a quiet weapon, one that earned respect even from those ordered to defeat them. In newspapers, posters, and radio broadcasts, Nazi propaganda painted British soldiers as weak, decadent, and unwilling to fight. They were portrayed as men hiding behind their empire, relying on others to do their fighting. This image was repeated so often that many German civilians and some young soldiers accepted it as fact before the war began. The front told a different story. Letters sent home from France and later from North Africa quietly challenged the official narrative. German soldiers wrote of British units that held defensive positions stubbornly, retreated with order, and fought without dramatic gestures or ideological slogans. One private noted that the British did not shout or boast, but instead focused on timing, cover, and coordination. Diaries reveal growing skepticism toward propaganda. After Dunkirk, some soldiers openly questioned how an inferior army had managed to save hundreds of thousands of men under German pressure. A German sergeant wrote that the British evacuation looked less like panic and more like planning. Such thoughts were rarely shared openly, but they circulated privately among those who had seen the front. Not all soldiers rejected propaganda outright. Many still believed in German superiority, but their respect for British professionalism complicated that belief. The enemy no longer matched the caricature. By 1941, for countless German soldiers, propaganda became something to be listened to in public and quietly doubted in private. The gap between words and experience grew wider with every battle. For those who fought face-to-face with British troops, reality proved stronger than slogans. Propaganda could shape opinions, but the battlefield had the final word. When British soldiers were taken prisoner by German forces, expectations on both sides were shaped by propaganda and fear. Many Germans assumed captured enemies would be bitter, defiant, or broken. What they encountered instead was something far more familiar and unsettling. German camp records from 1940 and 1941 repeatedly describe British prisoners as orderly and disciplined. Upon arrival, British non-commissioned officers often re-established unit routines without being told to do so. Roll calls were organized. Living areas were kept clean. One German camp commandant noted that British soldiers behaved as if still under their own command, maintaining structure even in defeat. German commanders took notice. Several Wehrmacht officers wrote that British prisoners accepted captivity with a professional attitude, neither pleading nor provoking. A German lieutenant responsible for escorting POWs remarked that British officers insisted on fair treatment for their men, but did so calmly and within military etiquette. This behavior contrasted sharply with the image promoted by Nazi propaganda. Respect began to develop quietly. Guards recorded that British prisoners followed camp rules, but never out of fear, only habit. Humor became a bridge. Football matches were allowed. Conversations about pre-war life replaced hostility. In private letters, German soldiers admitted that British POWs were easier to manage than expected, and often easier than soldiers from other armies. This mutual respect did not erase the reality of war. The barbed wire remained. But within it, something rare survived: recognition. Both sides understood they were professionals caught on opposite ends of history. In captivity, British soldiers lost their freedom, but not their dignity. And German officers, bound by their own traditions, could not help but acknowledge it. German officers entered the war trained to respect authority, hierarchy, and command. Yet when they observed British officers in combat and captivity, they encountered a leadership style that felt different, but equally effective. German after-action reports from France and North Africa often described British officers as unusually calm and physically close to their men. Rather than commanding from a distance, many British officers were seen moving among their soldiers, giving short, clear instructions without raised voices or ideological language. One German captain noted that British officers led by example, not spectacle. This approach impressed German professionals. Wehrmacht officers compared it to their own traditions, recognizing similarities beneath the surface differences. While German command emphasized strict obedience and centralized control, British leadership relied heavily on trust, initiative, and regimental identity. German observers remarked that British non-commissioned officers carried significant responsibility, allowing officers to focus on coordination rather than constant supervision. In POW camps, these differences became even clearer. British officers maintained authority without visible enforcement. Discipline remained intact through mutual respect rather than fear. A German major overseeing a camp wrote that British officers did not need punishment to command loyalty, a statement that quietly challenged the assumptions of Nazi military ideology. What emerged was a form of professional rivalry. German officers did not see British leadership as inferior, only different. Both systems produced effective soldiers. On the battlefield, this recognition sharpened competition rather than hatred. The enemy was no longer faceless. For many German officers, British leadership became a mirror, one that reflected an alternative way to command men in war. Respect did not weaken resolve. It deepened it. Two professional armies bound by tradition. Even amidst the barbed wire and watchtowers of prisoner-of-war camps, life found ways to assert itself. British soldiers captured by German forces often sought small pockets of normalcy, turning to sports, humor, and simple routines to preserve their dignity. Football became a central outlet. Teams were organized, matches scheduled, and goals fiercely contested, not as propaganda, but as a reminder of identity and camaraderie. German guards frequently observed these games with curiosity. Some officers allowed matches, recognizing that disciplined activity kept prisoners orderly and morale high. Diaries from German soldiers describe watching British POWs kicking makeshift balls across sand and grass, shouting encouragement, and laughing despite the uncertainty of war. The atmosphere was surreal. Two armies divided by ideology, yet connected through shared human enjoyment. Humor became another bridge. Prisoners wrote satirical newsletters, staged plays, and traded jokes in multiple languages. A German guard recounted laughing alongside a British prisoner over a pun about rations, small moments that blurred the lines between captor and captive. These interactions did not erase the reality of confinement, but they allowed mutual recognition of humanity. Occasionally, informal friendships emerged. Soldiers from opposite sides would exchange small gifts, share news of the war, or assist each other with chores. While formal fraternization was forbidden, the daily reality of life in a camp created opportunities for connection, revealing an unexpected dimension of war. Even enemies could find common ground. These acts of play, laughter, and cooperation reminded all involved that war, for all its brutality, was still fought by humans. In the midst of strategy, discipline, and suffering, British soldiers preserved not only their courage but their humanity, and even their captors could not help but notice. In the vast deserts of North Africa, German and British forces faced each other not just with tanks and rifles, but with a strange mutual recognition of skill. The Afrika Korps, led by Erwin Rommel, often encountered British units that fought with discipline, resilience, and a calm professionalism that earned grudging respect from German soldiers. German diaries describe battles near Tobruk and El Alamein where British artillery and infantry executed coordinated maneuvers under extreme conditions. Supply lines were stretched, sandstorms raged, yet British units maintained cohesion. One German lieutenant noted that the enemy fought as if every man understood the rules of war and honor, a reflection of what soldiers referred to as a gentleman's war. Rommel himself acknowledged British professionalism in his communications. He admired their tactical discipline, their ability to adapt under pressure, and their unwavering morale. Unlike propaganda, which depicted the British as decadent and weak, the desert battlefield revealed a competent, stubborn, and skilled foe. German soldiers were often surprised by the courteous conduct displayed by captured officers, the orderly surrender of troops, and the restrained treatment of prisoners. These encounters contrasted sharply with other theaters of war. Desert warfare demanded mobility, trust in one's soldiers, and respect for the opponent's capabilities. For many German troops, the British exemplified a combat style where skill, fairness, and honor mattered alongside strategy and aggression. Even amidst bombs and machine gun fire, professional respect flourished. In the North African desert, war had a strange etiquette. German soldiers came to realize that fighting the British was not just a test of strength, but a test of professionalism. The gentlemanly conduct of the enemy left a lasting impression, one of admiration amid the brutality of battle. By 1944 to 1945, the face of the war had changed. German soldiers, weary from years of combat, long supply lines, and relentless Allied pressure, had gained a sober understanding of the British Army's endurance. No longer an abstract enemy shaped by propaganda, the British soldier had become a real, formidable opponent in the minds of many Wehrmacht troops. German diaries and letters reveal repeated admiration for British discipline and tenacity. Even under bombing raids, shortages, and harsh conditions, British units maintained cohesion. One German NCO wrote, "They retreat without panic. They fight with patience. Every step seems measured, every action deliberate." This recognition was often coupled with fatigue. German soldiers were exhausted, yet they could not deny the skill and determination of their adversaries. The concept of professional respect grew alongside realism. Germans who had once believed in rapid victories came to accept that the British would not break easily. From Normandy to the Rhine, accounts describe soldiers observing British infantry and armor advance methodically, following orders and minimizing chaos, even when under heavy fire. This steadfastness contrasted sharply with German exhaustion and the collapsing morale within their own ranks. For many, admiration coexisted with frustration. They understood the enemy's resolve could prolong the war, and that victory was no longer guaranteed by numbers or technology alone. Realism replaced bravado, and the British soldier, disciplined and enduring, became a benchmark of professionalism. Fatigue, fear, and dwindling resources could not erase respect. Rather, they made it more acute. In the final months of the war, German troops saw clearly that they faced an opponent whose resolve had been tested and proven, a quiet testament to endurance in the chaos of total war. By 1944 to 1945, the face of the war had changed. German soldiers, weary from years of combat, long supply lines, and relentless Allied pressure, had gained a sober understanding of the British Army's endurance. No longer an abstract enemy shaped by propaganda, the British soldier had become a real, formidable opponent in the minds of many Wehrmacht troops. German diaries and letters reveal repeated admiration for British discipline and tenacity. Even under bombing raids, shortages, and harsh conditions, British units maintained cohesion. One German NCO wrote, "They retreat without panic. They fight with patience. Every step seems measured, every action deliberate." This recognition was often coupled with fatigue. German soldiers were exhausted, yet they could not deny the skill and determination of their adversaries. The concept of professional respect grew alongside realism. Germans who had once believed in rapid victories came to accept that the British would not break easily. From Normandy to the Rhine, accounts describe soldiers observing British infantry and armor advance methodically, following orders and minimizing chaos, even when under heavy fire. This steadfastness contrasted sharply with German exhaustion and the collapsing morale within their own ranks. For many, admiration coexisted with frustration. They understood the enemy's resolve could prolong the war, and that victory was no longer guaranteed by numbers or technology alone. Realism replaced bravado, and the British soldier, disciplined and enduring, became a benchmark of professionalism. Fatigue, fear, and dwindling resources could not erase respect. Rather, they made it more acute. In the final months of the war, German troops saw clearly that they faced an opponent whose resolve had been tested and proven, a quiet testament to endurance in the chaos of total war.